What's the difference between a dead man and a live one? It's movement. 10 minutes before they were dead, their heart was beating, there was a pulse going through their veins. Now it's no more. So you might wonder to yourself, what causes movement? Well, movement is caused by proteins. A protein is like a long linear thread. It's assembled by RNA and DNA, and it folds over because there's charges along the length of that thread. And the shape is very complex. It's very squished together, and that squishing causes little pockets to form on it. Now, when particles in the environment come and they fall in those little cracks, the charge in the particle causes the charge in the protein strand to elongate and stretch into different positions, and that's how we get movement. All of life is about proteins, charges, causing them to twist and contort, and a chain reaction, when you lift your arm like this, there's just millions of proteins at work, just changing as signals are flying through your veins. Now, I want to talk about how a protein's created. It's created in the center of the cell, in the nucleus. There's a DNA strand, and an RNA copy comes about, and it'll go and synthesize a protein from that. The Human Genome Project found that there's 25,000 genes in a human. It was a great disappointment, in a sense, because there's over 100,000 different types of protein in the body, and they wanted to know, well, how can you have 100,000 proteins when you only have 25,000 genes? You're supposed to have one gene per protein, and maybe 20 or 30,000 other genes to be a control structure. So they discovered, okay, what happens is the gene can actually create up to 2,000 different proteins. A gene turns out to be a blueprint. It's like a blueprint housed in a library. You got an architect, he goes in there, he pulls off the cover, he looks at what he could build, or look at his little blueprint options, and then he splits them apart, he splices them together in different ways and builds what he needs. In fact, most of us are actually missing genes. You don't need all the genes that everyone has because your genes can be configured in different ways to basically build the same exact protein that somebody else builds with another gene. So they're these configurable blueprints. Less than 5% of us actually can say that we have a problem from our birth defects. 95% of the problems are due to signals. It can be your central nervous system got damaged through trauma and now signals can't flow properly. It could be that there's toxins and chemicals in the environment that are affecting you. And then sometimes it can be thoughts. The thought of an anorexic person, for example, they can have this misperception that they're too fat. And that thought will cause them to starve themselves. They'll basically change through their thought, which was off, their biology, which was already on. Aside from that, I want to talk about how the body receives signals from the outward in. And essentially, you have a nucleus. The nucleus contains chromosomes, 23 pairs of chromosomes, which are bundled genes, and these genes are each the parts that can generate the proteins. And inside these chromosomes, you have a protein sleeve that covers the chromosome. And what we know about proteins, once again, is you take a signal and it'll bend shape. So how you remove the sleeve off of the chromosome is you apply a signal to it, and that removes it off, and now you can get the data out of it. So what happens now, you're wondering, okay, well, how do we get a signal in there in order to remove that sleeve and decide which gene to use? Genes aren't on or off, they're covered or uncovered when you're coming to reproduce new cells. Well, what happens is every cell has a membrane around it, just like our skin has a membrane, and there's little proteins sticking on the outside of the membrane and little proteins sticking on the inside. They're called effector and receptor proteins. Just like your body has eyes, ears, nose, mouth, we have receptor structures built into our skin, the cell has little receptor structures built into it. So as signals are flying around maybe in the bloodstream or through the air, they'll land on the receptor, which is tuned to different signals in the environment. It'll cause a movement, and that movement causes the one on the inside of the cell wall to move, and that'll send a signal in. It'll head its way over to the nucleus and decide which genes they're going to go and uncover to build products with. Now, human complexity comes because you have 100,000 different switches on the outside of a cell, and based on where they're toggled on or off, or in which position, which configuration, that's how the human complexity is derived, because at any given time you might have your switches toggled in any various array because of all the signals floating in the environment, and you can see how that can be complex, how we can figure out why are some genes being used and others not being used. One of the interesting things, there's something called a myoblast cell. It's a stem cell, and it's inside your body. It's inside of all our bodies now. And when you go to exercise at the gym, you're going to activate a large group, a large population of these myoblast cells, and they're going to go out and contribute to the mass of your muscle. They found that if you take identical myoblast cells and you put some of them in one environment, they might turn into bone. Some in another environment will turn into muscle, and some in another environment will turn into fat. So what it turns out is that the environment influences these things and causes them to be built. Well, you guys are virtually identical to a rat if you look at your DNA. But yeah, it's almost like an insult. But your environment is what's building you. It's not necessarily the instruction set and the configurable blueprints. There's 50 trillion cells in our body, about that many living cells. And what the purpose of our control structures or receptor structures are to do, your eyes and your ears and your nose, they take in signals from the environment, and then they go and forward those they set off an internal signal, and then in an internal sense we can interpret and respond to the signals in an environment. So as you go about hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, you're toggling a whole chain of events, a chain of movement throughout your body, and those signals are going all the way down the depths of your cells, and they are covering and uncovering genes, and those genes are basically being used to build products and build new cells. Genes don't decide your fate, the environment does. Now what I would say, instead of worrying about the configurable blueprints that are hiding within your cell walls, I'd worry more about the environment that has continual influence on you. Like the person with anorexia that thought that a certain way and it influenced them, your thoughts are one of the most powerful things you have. Because when you have a thought, it'll lead to an action. And your action might be walking out into the sun, which will expose you to different kind of signals. It could be walking up to business and exposing yourself to different kind of signals. It could be putting yourself in a cold environment or a hot environment. Your thoughts lead you to go do things and put yourself in new environments. And when you're in a new environment, you're receiving new signals, and that's causing you to build yourself in new ways. And there's a lot of power in that. If you were to walk outside and get hit by a car, that's a very powerful thing that your genes have no influence over. And just as visual as that is, everything that you do in every environment, there's all these little things at play that you don't even realize are going on.